Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Lonely Among Us, which is episode 6 of season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the episode Lonely Among Us. So Lonely Among Us is the episode where an energy being comes on board the Enterprise as they're ferrying delegates to a conference. The energy being jumps from person to person and eventually takes over Picard's body, where he takes the ship back off course to go back to the nebula, and Riker and Troy talk about relieving Picard of command, but they don't do so until it's too late, where the energy being takes Picard's body and beams back into the nebula, and Picard's consciousness is lost somewhere in the nebula, and they manage to find Picard's consciousness in the computer, and they use the transporter to reform his body, and the delegates are starting to hunt and eat each other, but no one really cares. So that is Lonely Among Us. So it's funny, especially when I was growing up as a teenager watching Next Generation, first getting into it. This is the episode I singled out as really hating and not liking from season 1. Not Code of Honor, not Last Outpost, not Naked Now, and not some of these other episodes like Justice or whatever that people hate. It was this one. I really hated this one, and I really didn't like watching it, and I would skip it where other episodes I wouldn't. Mainly because I found it boring. I think that the premise of it was just really dumb and uninteresting. Like, the concept of an energy being going back and forth and through people and controlling people's bodies, I think is something Star Trek has done too many times, and also a lot better in other cases. Like, this just wasn't a good case in it, and the ending was just too silly for me. In the beginning and the middle was just boring. Like, it took a long time for the plot to really kick in. It was just a lot of sort of boring nonsense. So for me, and I still have a sort of dislike for this episode that maintained that I still think this is, I don't know if I would go as far as to call it the worst episode of season 1, because there are a lot of bad episodes of season 1. I think I in particular would point out Code of Honor as being worse, but for some reason when I was younger, this is the one I singled out as absolutely hating, like absolutely could not stand it, and as I said, I still don't like it. So we get, it's really boring. I'm sorry. This energy being like comes from the nebula and like takes over Worf's body and jumps from Worf to Crusher, and she's acting all weird, and people are like, "Oh, Doctor, why are you doing this? Why are you acting weird?" And then it leaves her body and she continues to act weird, and then it goes in the computer. It kills the chief engineer of the week. Although I don't think they ever referred to Mr. Singh as the chief engineer. But it's funny, they even said at one point you should consult Chief Engineer Argyle, who was the character that appeared in Where No One Has Gone Before, and I think he appears again as well. But anyway, kills this random red shirt who's wearing a yellow shirt. Then it jumps into Picard's body. Now here's where it really gets boring to me, or really done incorrectly, I should say, is that they do this Mutiny storyline, and this Mutiny storyline was done so much better in other episodes. In fact, I'm almost certain I'd seen episodes like Allegiance before I saw this, and so I already saw this Mutiny storyline done better. So when Picard starts acting all weird, and he's obviously acting weird and out of character when the alien takes over, they start to notice, and they notice that something's up. He changes course and goes back to the nebula, taking them off their scheduled course where they were going to take the delegates to this conference. And so they have this meeting, all of the rest of the senior officers, mainly Riker, Troy, and Dr. Crusher, talk about relieving him of duty. And they're like, oh, it's shaky ground, how we're going to do this. And they point out that Dr. Crusher could relieve him of duty right now, but she would have to justify it later with medical records for Starfleet, otherwise they'd be on shaky ground. Which is actually better than the original series episode Doomsday Machine. One of my biggest complaints about that episode is when McCoy wanted to relieve Commodore Decker of duty, and Spock's like, oh, but you would have to prove your reasonings for doing it with medical records, and McCoy's like, oh, I haven't had a chance to examine him yet, but it doesn't matter. He could relieve him now, then examine him, and then later would have the records to prove that he was correct for doing so. At the very least, could relieve him temporarily until they can examine him, but of course they didn't do that because of plot. And by the way, it was super obvious that Commodore Decker was suffering from PTSD, so much so that he was not fit to command. I mean, it was obvious to anyone and their mother, so the only reason he wasn't relieved is because that's what the script needed to happen for that episode. So here, at least they do acknowledge that they could relieve him immediately, but it's less certain of whether or not they would have the proof to back it up. So when they go to Picard and suggest that maybe something, is off, he actually turns it around and does the, I know you are, but what am I? and tells them, like, oh, I think you're the one who's acting weird and out of character. I order you, Riker, and you, Dr. Crusher, to take these, medical exams to prove you're sane. And this works, which it shouldn't, because all the senior officers are all in agreement that Picard is acting out of character, and nobody thinks that Riker and Troy is acting out of character. So they're just like, when he says that to them, they should have been like, well, no, sir, we think that you are not in the ability to make that sort of judgment, and we're going to need you to take an examination first. Now, if it turns out to be true, then later, yes, we can have ours, but it's kind of like, we brought our concerns to you first. But instead, that just fucking works, where he just goes, I know you are, but what am I? Why don't you do the exam? So they do the exam, which is dumb, and again, it's because the plot needed to happen. They should have never agreed to it. They should have relieved him of command right then and there. But then, so Dr. Crusher goes back to Picard and shows them the results, saying that her and Riker are, of course, okay. And Picard all but pretty much confesses to the fact that he's being inhabited by an alien. And in fact, at one point, when, Crusher asks, is Picard there? And he is like, oh yes, he is here. And we are both here. And when he talks, his voice is like, they do something to change his voice where it sounds like, it like reverberates. It sounds like there's two people talking. It sounds like, yes, we are here. And it sounds really weird and different. So what happens is Crusher continues to talk to Picard. He goes on the bridge. He starts acting weird some more. And then finally, she relieves him of his duty, but he uses his weird magnetic electrical magneto powers to paralyze them, and he runs off and beams himself in the middle of the nebula. So, and here's what should have happened. When Crusher went into the ready room to talk to him, and he starts talking with his weird voice, going, yes, we're both here, and confirming that he's being possessed by an alien. What should have happened is Crusher should have immediately went, security, get in here. Boom, security shows up, put him under arrest. He's relieved of duty, and we need to send him to a medical examination, take him to sick bay. He's being possessed by an alien. immediately. I mean, he's talking all weird and being like, yes, we're both here. Like, why the fuck is she continuing to talk with him? Why didn't she immediately call for security and immediately put, I mean, this beyond obvious. She doesn't have to worry about Starfleet saying, oh, you didn't have any right or any sort of proof to relieve him of command when he confessed to being possessed by an alien and is talking all fucking weird. Clearly should have relieved them of command immediately, like right then and there, instead of yelling and waiting until he had the chance to go on the bridge and use his electro magic to his bullshit powers. Which, how the fuck did he get those powers? Like, even when he left and went back to the transporter room, and they're still stuck there going with all the electricity. Like, how does an alien have that power? I thought the alien itself was energy. So how is he able to like leave part of the energy self like there going fucking up all the people while he walks away? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So it's all contrived plot bullshit. But then there's the worst part of it. This is the goofy, really goofy, shitty part, is when he beams himself into space and they think Picard is dead, and then Picard is apparently on in the computer system. You can tell because a P shows up on the helm. It says P for Picard. Oh my god, that's so dumb. That is so dumb. And then they use the magic transporter, the magic transporter device to bring Jean-Luc back to life, even though he had beamed himself into space. I guess because they say he beamed into space as an energy being, and so they were able to use the transporter to reconnect his body, and his consciousness went into his body because it was already in the computer. Like, this is like some fantasy level bullshit. And I'll have you note, people who worked on the show and were responsible for sort of the technology behind the show, most notably Michael Acuna, who did a lot of the prop set design and actually wrote the Enterprise D Next Generation technical manual, and also Rick Steinbach, who was also involved in a lot of technology use. They both criticized this episode, particularly for the use of the transporter to restore Picard's life, saying it was an inappropriate use of the transporter, which is a very mild way of saying it. I would say it more like it was some fantasy level magical bullshit. Is how I would state it. And it's okay, and here's the thing. Then we get back into the B plot, the side plot with the Antikins and the Soleil. And apparently the B plot was supposed to be something else in the original script, but DC Fontana rewrote it and kind of based it off of Journey to Babel, which she also wrote, where there was with delegates on board. And I feel like it felt kind of half-assed. Now, the one positive thing I will say is that the aliens are cool looking. I like the design of the aliens, but the way they are constantly, we must be upwind from the Antikins. There's no fucking wind on a spaceship, was the first thing I thought. Because when he said that, they're like, oh yeah, we'll make sure you're upwind. I'm like, what wind? The environmental system? Like, what are you talking about? And then, the whole time they're just talking about, trying to eat each other and attack each other, and the crew sort of has to we have even O'Brien, who's actually, it hasn't been established as O'Brien yet. It's just Calmini, who they got back again. I think he was supposed to be a security officer in this episode, and he's, trying to keep the two aliens from killing each other. And then, like, they're talking, like, when they go to talk to the Anakin, they're talking about, eating one of the animals they brought on board. And they were like, oh, where were you from this time, this time? Like, oh, we were eating. It's like, you were eating for, like, 5 hours? And, like, it was a big meal. It's heavily implied that they're eating one of the other delegates, and they don't follow this up in any manner, any shape or form. And then, so the worst part of it that just made this whole episode like fall apart was at the end when Picard, after they use magic to bring Picard back to life. People complain about fucking Into Darkness. Really? You can't complain about Into Darkness when shit like this exists. But anyway, about, the whole bringing Kirk back to life thing. But anyway, they use magic to bring Picard back to life. And then Yar goes to Picard and Riker and are like, oh my god, one of the delegates just killed with the other, and there's been a murder on our ship, and one of the guests that we're entrusted to carry to this conference has just died, killed by the other delegation. And what is Riker and Picard's response? Is the response to be like, okay, let's get security, let's have an investigation, this is a diplomatic nightmare, there's been a murder on this ship, we gotta investigate it, we gotta corner off the aliens, we gotta make sure that doesn't happen again, we gotta call their family, we gotta call the delegates, we gotta call the conference, we gotta clear this with Starfleet, let them know, what are we gonna do, how are we gonna investigate this, what should we do to proceed, and because it's very clear that the other delegates is responsible for it, but we have to handle this with tact, so we have to do this, we have to do that, and this is a very command level emergency situation we need to take care of. Is that the response? No. I love the response. The response is so good. So the response is actually, yo, what the fuck are you bothering us with this? Can't you see Picard just got brought back to life with magic? I mean, we can't be bothered to deal with any of this bullshit right now. Go away. Oh my god. That's essentially Riker's response. He's like, do you really need to tell us about it right now? Yes! Fucking Riker, yes, there was a murder on your ship. One of the delegates that you're entrusted with their lives for this whole diplomatic situation has just been murdered. Yes, she needs to tell you about it right now, and yes, you should get off your fucking ass and do something about it. Jesus Christ, I don't care if the captain was just brought back to life by magic. He's alive again. Go use your magic transporter to bring that other delegate back to life. I don't fucking know. Like, just do something. Oh, God. I mean, that part just drives me insane. Drives me insane. Anyway, funny line in this episode where Dr. Crusher goes to Worf and is like, oh, we're going to have to talk to you about your memory lapse. And his response, I still don't remember having one. Oh, god damn it. God damn. Another thing that's weird I noted, we see like the sensor relay room, and this is where Worf gets charged. This is, I think, the only time we've ever seen this room. We only ever seen this set in this one episode. I don't think we ever seen this set again. And it was just an interesting thing to note. The whole time, though, when they were talking about the sensors, I kept saying, the sensors. Like, from Lower Decks, there's something wrong with our sensor. But anyway, yeah. So I think that's a bit like all I have to say about this episode. So let me thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. Very much appreciated. It does really help the channel so much, and I am forever grateful for all of your support. So we have Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Managester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelosio, Norman Buckwell, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal House. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a couple of patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Ricky, who says, this is the worst episode of the first season of TNG in my opinion. I think this is an absolutely dumb, idiotic, and unbelievable episode that I typically skip over every rewatch I do. I mean, what can I say? This whole electricity alien invading the crew and then to Picard, and the way it plays out is so ridiculous, and Picard gives orders that the entire freaking crew should know from the get-go that something isn't right, especially when he begins to threaten the crew, and that whole stunt that Picard does with shooting electricity with his hands through the controls was laugh out loud terrible. And then the whole alien ambassadors on the ship continually whining and bickering was so annoying, and it angers me. By the way, these aliens look awful and cheesy. On top of that, and to top it all off, at the end of the episode, somebody got nearly murdered, and when Yar brings it up to Picard, he was like, "Oh, I don't care, leave me alone, let somebody else take care of it." I mean, really, this was the episode that turned me off to this show for 8 months until my friends told me that it got better. This is in a top 5 worst for me, so my rating is a 1 out of 10. I don't think one of the delegates nearly got murdered. I think one of the delegates did get murdered. I think they even said they was missing, or they found the dead body or something. I don't know. I have to rewatch that scene again. But I thought they were murdered. But yes, I agree with your dislike for this episode. So other comment is from Brandon Neil Howes that says, "Lonely Among Us or the Unbearable Smugness of TNG Season 1. Not sure which annoys me more, the snake aliens fighting with the dog aliens or Data being Sherlock Holmes. I do enjoy Ron Jones's creepy music as ever, but save yourself some time and watch Journey to Babel instead. This is the only mention of the sensor maintenance. I think I feel bad that the Indian crew member died. That seems to be sending out the wrong message to me." 4 uncredited cameos by Mark Alamo out of 10. Oh yeah, that's right. Mark Alamo played one of the Antikins, or was it one of the Celi? One of those. This was the first time he appeared in Star Trek, and in fact, he himself asked to be uncredited because he wasn't sure how it was going to turn out, but it actually turned out fine, and so much so, of course, that he kept coming back. But yeah, I forgot to mention Data's Sherlock Holmes thing, because that actually began in this episode. Because Picard mentions it off, just the dialogue in this first season is so terrible. How they just mention bullshit like that. Oh, it's like the gumshoe, whatever, detective, and then Data all of a sudden starts like smoking this pipe, and he's even smoking like Yard chokes when he walks by him. Why is he smoking a pipe and acting like Holmes, like out of nowhere? Like, that was just goofy. I'm sorry. I don't like this episode at all. So my rating for Lonely Among Us out of 10 is going to be a 2, extremely poor. Now, I feel like I'm being generous to this episode because Ricky gave it a 1 and I'm giving it a 2, but I guess I am being a little magnanimous to this episode because it wasn't, I guess, the worst thing ever. As I said, its biggest offense is that it was boring. Like, I do think episodes like Code of Honor is worse. And I think there's another terrible one coming up in season 1, I'm not sure. But, I definitely think it's worse than episodes like Naked Now and The Last Outpost. I think, or Haven, by that way. Or Justice, or some of these other episodes that people hate. I think this episode is clearly a lot worse, and I do still signal this out as one of the worst of the show. Even though I don't hate it as much as I used to, So, I mean, some stuff was kind of interesting, I guess, but yeah. So it doesn't quite reach that 1, but yeah, it's still very, very, very terrible episode. So that is it for my review of A Lonely Among Us. I shall be back. So let me check this little schedule here and see what's coming up on Enchantment of Eternity. So Thursday we'll be back with a new review for Strange New Worlds. Saturday I'll be back with the aforementioned review for Justice. And then Monday, another TNG review with The Battle. So that is what's coming up on Enchantment of Eternity. So be sure to check out my channel for that. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover Star Trek Next Generation, as well as covering many other Star Trek shows like Strange New Worlds and much more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.